It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Karen Whitfield's tantrum came crashing into our lives, and I was left standing in the yard, watering the garden Marcus had built with reclaimed bricks, a garden that had always felt like the anchor of our peace. I'd seen her walking down the sidewalk before, but today there was something different about her. She wasn't her usual smile and wave self. No, today she was carrying a small toolkit, one that looked more like a cheap afterthought than anything a serious person would use. And that expression on her face, it wasn't the kind that waved at neighbors. It was the kind of look someone gets before they ruin your day. "Ma'am," she called out, her eyes fixed on Marcus, who was knee-deep in his tomato plants near our front gate. She raised her toolkit as if it were a badge of honor. "I need to speak with the resident about a serious security violation." Marcus, always calm, wiped his hands on his old gardening gloves and gave her a polite nod. "Good afternoon. I'm not sure what security check you're referring to, but this is private property. Our gate isn't subject to HOA jurisdiction." That was when I knew things were about to go sideways. Karen's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, the confidence she'd carried like armor slipped. She pulled out a laminated business card, as if presenting her credentials would somehow make this all legitimate. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Oakwood Manor Homeowners Association, and I have every right to ensure security protocols are followed." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't even look up from his garden. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've told you before, the HOA has no authority over individual property security. This is a private matter." The tension between them thickened as Karen took a step closer to the gate. I had a bad feeling, but I stayed silent, clutching the garden hose in my hand, watching. Karen began to pull out a strange-looking tool from her kit. "This needs to be accessible to HOA personnel for emergencies," she insisted, jamming the device into our lock with a kind of reckless authority that made me feel sick. The look on Marcus's face said it all. He recognized junk when he saw it. The cheap plastic tool snapped in half with the force of her insistence. I could almost hear the sound of the universe laughing at Karen's expense. But Karen, she was oblivious. Instead of acknowledging her embarrassing mistake, she doubled down. "This is clearly a modified lock," she spat, her face red with fury. "You've tampered with standard residential hardware to prevent authorized access. This is a violation of Municipal Code 15-7B and HOA Bylaw Article 12. As she rattled off these completely fabricated legal references, I noticed the small digital recorder in her other hand, the red light blinking ominously. She was documenting this disaster, fully convinced she was in control. I could almost hear her rehearsing her victory speech in her mind. Marcus didn't bat an eye. "Well, that's unfortunate," he said, still mild-mannered, though I could hear the slightest twitch of a smile in his voice. Her lock-picking kit had failed spectacularly. She just stood there for a moment, staring at the broken tool like it was a foreign object. Then came the moment of truth. "I'm calling the authorities," Karen announced, pulling out her phone with a dramatic flourish. I stood there, doing my best to look like I was minding my own business, while my heart raced. This wasn't just a dispute over a gate. This was a full-on confrontation. And Karen was about to unleash what she thought would be her moment of triumph. I knew exactly who was going to answer that 911 call. And it wasn't going to go the way Karen thought. As Karen dialed, I exchanged a quick glance with Marcus. The moment his eyes met mine, something shifted. I knew he was bracing himself for what was coming, but I don't think either of us had any idea how deeply this would cut. "911, what's your emergency?" Karen launched into her rehearsed speech, going on and on about how Marcus was illegally occupying a house, refusing to comply with HOA security protocols, and tampering with locks. It was all nonsense, but the officer on the other end wasn't aware of that yet. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the voice on the other end of Karen's phone froze me in my tracks. "Ma'am, I need a specific address and your full name for the report." I could feel the blood drain from my face as I watched Marcus's expression change. Slowly, his features hardened, his eyes narrowing as he processed the sound of that voice. The voice belonged to someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. His son, David. The same David who had become a sheriff's deputy. The same David Marcus hadn't seen since the night of Sarah's funeral, 2 years ago. And now, that very voice, filled with authority and professionalism, was sending his world into a tailspin. Ma'am, can you describe the nature of the alleged illegal occupation? Karen, blissfully unaware of the storm she was stirring up, described Marcus and the situation as though she had any right to. David, though, didn't miss a beat. He took down the information, asking for identification and proof of residence, just like any sheriff's deputy would. But as soon as Marcus handed over his license and deed, I saw it in David's face, the flicker of recognition. David had known who he was talking to all along. I could almost feel the weight of the silence as father and son stood on either side of a chasm, both trying to figure out what this moment meant. Marcus, who hadn't spoken to his son in years, trying to keep it together, and David, whose professional demeanor was cracking with the strain of being forced into this position. Then came the most unexpected twist. "Sir, I'll need to see some form of ID," David said in a voice that wavered just slightly. He looked at Marcus's papers. Everything was in order. The property was clearly legally occupied by the rightful owner. "David." Marcus's voice broke through the tension, soft and vulnerable. For a second, it felt like the whole world stopped. David's face, frozen for a moment, softened. He stood there, staring at Marcus, both of them silently fighting to acknowledge what was between them, something neither of them had wanted to face. After a long beat, David cleared his throat, a bit of emotion breaking through. "Ma'am," David turned to Karen, his voice still steady. "Private property owners have no legal obligation to provide HOA representatives with access to their homes or security systems. If the property owner has refused access, that's within his legal rights." Karen's smug smile faltered. This wasn't going as she'd planned, but she wasn't done. "I'm the president of the HOA," she protested. "I have authority over this neighborhood." David's patience was wearing thin. "You have the authority granted to you by the actual HOA," he said, his words precise, cutting through her delusions. "And it doesn't extend to forcing access to private homes with cheap, unauthorized tools." Karen's face turned beet red as she realized the implications. The moment she had been counting on to assert her dominance was crumbling around her. But the worst was yet to come. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a criminal. And when I heard her mention that she'd been collecting fees from the neighbors, pretending to be the HOA president, my stomach dropped. That's when everything fell apart. David's face turned grim. "Ma'am, did you say you've been collecting fees from residents?" The silence that followed was unbearable. It was the sound of everything Karen had built crumbling to the ground. Fraud, theft by deception. All of it was unraveling. As the full weight of the situation dawned on her, Karen tried to backpedal, but it was too late. The district attorney was involved, and the police were already contacting the residents she had scammed. Marcus and David stood there, father and son, finally acknowledging each other after years of silence. As Karen was arrested and taken away, the two of them shared a moment, a quiet reconciliation that I knew had been a long time coming. David's voice cracked as he said, "Dad, I'm sorry it took something like this to bring us together, but I'm glad we're talking again." And for the first time in years, Marcus smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in a long time. That evening, as Karen's world collapsed, I watched as Marcus and David began the long process of rebuilding what had been broken. The gate, the lock, the quiet peace of our home, they were all intact. And for once, we could breathe easy again. Karen Whitfield would be remembered as the woman who tried to run the neighborhood. But for me, she was just the catalyst for the real story, the one of reconciliation, truth, and justice.